My name is Gwen Metatol, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters. We also have a number of board officers and board members here. If you'll raise your hand if you're officer board member. And we scatter out the way you're supposed to so everyone meets new friends. Okay, let me tell you just briefly about the League, and then we'll move on to our program. I can't seem to co-process. You hold that, okay. Okay, good. So our mission, and this is the core of it and what I love, our mission is to empower voters and to defend democracy. And I think that's why you're here. Our vision is a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate, because it takes all of those. We believe in the power of women and men to create a more perfect democracy. We are fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and in practice. I can't. No. Okay, so our work is a nonpartisan organization. The League does not support or oppose candidates or parties. And in our discussion, we will be asking not to mention candidates or parties. As individuals, though, you can participate in the political process. We were happy to have you do that. The League does act on issues it has studied based on principles that have been carefully studied. And let me quickly hold up my book. Okay. This impact on issues covers all the policies of the League. You can download it for free as a PDF at the National League website, or pay $6 or $7 and get it from Amazon. The actions we take include education about voting and issues, advocacy about our mission and positions, and litigation. Litigation, this is more at the national and state level, but we are partners on many lawsuits, just so you know, so it's not just talk. As far as advocacy goes, only our president may speak for the League or someone I designate. Members are not personally obligated to support or advocate for us, but we can't go against what the National and State League have gone with their principles. So we use the impact on issues so that we can support the League position, and often we will cover that. We will bring that to you when we have a program. We cannot speak against the League position when speaking for the League, but privately you can. Now, some housekeeping. We are live streaming and our program on Facebook, and then it'll be posted on YouTube. And there'll be a link to it in the next newsletter. So anytime you miss, you can catch up on it. We have the camera far enough to the front now that you don't have to worry that as an audience member you will be captured. We don't turn it around to hear people talking. Please, let's see. Can't do both these. So please help yourself to the refreshments. We have to throw them away. They won't take them back, so have at it. The restrooms in the back behind the wall, if you haven't been there, feel free to take home handouts and the pens on the table. There are materials on the front tables if you want to join the League or learn more about it. We're happy to have you here. I will mention that we have this Tuesday, we have one of our Lunch with the Leagues in Jonesboro at the Black Olive at 11:30. It was in the newsletter, but you may not have gotten that yet. If you just signed up, it's open to anybody who's a friend of the League. It's a pay your own way, and we don't have an agenda. Sometimes it turns to politics, but sometimes not. But it's a wonderful way to get to know people. So if you want to go, be sure you stop by the table and let the woman who signed you in, let Linda know, so that she can get a head count and have enough reservations. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over at this point to Becky Keeler, who is our in-house constitutionalist. Yes, and will help us see what's happening here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My little bit of housekeeping is, if possible, get your hands on, well, at least 2 handouts. One is a notes page for you that has a couple of helpful bits of information that you might not be able to see up here. And the other is a half-page activity that we're going to do along the way. But don't get involved with it yet. So, I'm really glad that you've come here to hear about our Constitution, which is in so much peril at this moment. And so, thank you, take notes, be thinking about how you can make your voice heard with actual information that's captured in the Constitution of our country. So, thank you. All right. So we always open our meetings, our programs with a quote. And so today's quote comes from Jimmy Madison from his Federalist number 51. And this quote actually was penned by Madison about 250 years ago. And I'm going to be giving you a couple of other quotes from Madison. And just think about how relevant these quotes are today as they were back then. And the ideas in these quotes have found their way into the Constitution. So watch for those things too, how it plays out. So this is regarding separation of powers. He said the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, be they one or a few or many, and whether acquired through heredity, or self-appointed or elected. He says they may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Tyranny. Okay. I'm going to get this together. So, today's program, we'll look at the political foundations of our Constitution and its structure. We will do an overview of checks and balances. We don't have time to get to all of them, but we'll get through enough. So hold on to your seats, hold on to your socks. We're about to take off. We will also explore executive powers, and we will explore checks on executive powers. So, the first foundation of our U.S. Constitution is this notion of popular sovereignty. Very simple. Popular sovereignty is the belief that the governing authority resides first and foremost in who?
The people.
The people, right? The people. And so the philosophers who influenced the framers of our Constitution embraced Montesquieu's notion of separation of powers and, hey, where did that go? Anyway, Montesquieu has had a big impact on this Constitution with regard to separation of powers, which we'll get to in a second. So, the next is rule of law. And the rule of law is pretty simple, that we expect that we will be governed by laws that everybody is aware of, that applies to everybody, right? And that it is implemented in a fair, just, and equitable manner. And implemented universally the same way for everybody, right? That's our expectation, rule of law. And that law is made by the people we designate to make the law, and not some, the unfettered discretion of individuals, individual officials like dictators or autocrats or monarchs who, we had experience, in our earlier generations. And we all know that separation of powers is that division of those functions among separate branches. That's what we've done. And we've given primary legislative power to Congress, primary executive power to the president, and primary judicial power to the courts. And then federalism. Federalism is the allocation of governing authority between the federal government, state governments, and local governments. And you will see when you reread the Constitution that you're going to get today, how those relationships among the branches and the tiers of government, the branches that are separated and the tiers of levels of government interact and share the governing power among each other. So, before we get too far along, I think it's really important to understand that the framers of our Constitution were very concerned about managing factions. And so we'll start with another Madison Federalist 10 quote. And he says, when a majority is included in a faction, when a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passion or interest, that is, the passion or interest of the controlling faction, can be in a position to sacrifice the public good and the rights of other citizens. Public good and the rights of other citizens.
Explain that, please.
Okay. That sounded like sharing. Well done, thank you. So a faction is a combination of people or officials with a common goal in mind, a common mission, or a common interest to pursue. And they might not agree on every single itty bitty thing, but they agree on certain objectives. And they might be persuaded to use their position of power to affect, a policy that serves those goals, objectives, their purpose, their interests. And so, but Madison, I'm going to show you the next slide because he actually gives us a definition. What are factions? He says, a faction is a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority, say, of our citizens, or minority of the whole. And the whole could be the country, the whole could be, a state's population, a municipal population. Wherever you have tiers of government, there are going to be groups with certain interests that might clash with others' interests and with others' rights and expectations for their lives. Anyway, so he says, a number of citizens, whether majority or minority of the whole, who are united and actuated or motivated by some common impulse of passion or interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. So that's what our framers were worried about, and Madison spent a lot of ink on this. So This is related to the exercise that I want to start right now, and I will give you 2 minutes to work on this. You have a short piece of paper on your table if you got here early enough to get one. And it poses, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to respond to this, and then we'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. Hey, I'm glad you got engaged with that. There were some good questions. We'll get to it again in a little while. But first, we are going to hear what we, the people, had to say at the beginning of this Constitution as an expression of purpose for our Constitution and our government. So, who remembers the preamble? All right, so, you know, some of us are a little rusty on that. So it's on your table, it's on the screen, it's on your table in this notes paper. So you'll find it on there. So let's read it together. Come on.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
So that's the people's intent for this contract, right? All those things we expect to flow from the contract and the implementation of that contract by the government that we created by virtue of this document. So, let's get started. This slide also is on the notes paper, if you have one.
Do you have any more of those? We don't have any.
And we'll put them all in the newsletter with link to it, so you can download your own.
You need it. Okay. Can I take this?
So this is the organization of our contract, our Constitution. And you see in there that it lists articles. The articles start with the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. And they started with the legislative for a very important reason, and probably a whole lot of important reasons. But the legislative branch is kind of like the leader of the pack. And they are so important because we have a chance to elect each of the people who represent us in Congress or in the House and the people who represent us in the Senate. And so the Senate, we get 2 senators per state, right? Those senators serve for a longer term than the representatives. So they're kind of like the old guard who kind of, we would hope, have a perspective that's much broader than their state perspective. Of course, we expect them to advocate our state's issues, but they have to keep in mind how it affects the rest of this great, big, diverse, complicated, complex country. And so that's why the representatives are so important, who serve for 2 years, and many of them carry on for much longer, of course. But they're the ones who, in theory, have their finger on the pulse of today's people who live in Tennessee, or Kansas, or wherever. Let's see, I don't want to miss anything important. Oh, so, of course, I reread the Constitution while I was preparing for this talk, And I ran into something that I hadn't really thought about too much in a long time that I thought you guys might want to hear. So in Article 1, Section 9, is the following. No title of nobility shall be granted by the U.S. Yeah, and Section 10 of Article 1, Section 10 of Article 1 has a lot to say about the sharing of powers or the withholding of powers from the states. Okay, so that's a lot of business about the relationship between state and federal government will be found in Section 10. But probably, to me, the most important kind of core provision in the Constitution about states appears in the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment. The last of the 10 that were approved after this, like three years after the first articles were approved. Anyway, the 10th Amendment says, powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the Constitution to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So if there's a power out there that hasn't been clearly recognized and given to a state government, the state's people get a say in that law. And they can only make laws that are not inconsistent with federal Constitution and federal laws. So, there you go. There's more. So just as an example, no, I don't need to know. Thank you. Thank you. No. Yeah, there's more about this one. So some of the express powers of Congress are the big ones that you might think of, and that's like the power to impose taxes, the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, the power to regulate immigration and naturalization, the power to establish post offices, the power to establish copyright and patent laws, very important for commercial enterprises and inventors. The power to declare law is the exclusive province of who? Congress. Congress has the authority to declare war, not the president. That there's been a long history about with disputes about, well, things like when there's an urgency and you can't wait for Congress to get together and act to declare war, well, you know, president's got to be able to do something. And so they worked out a law, which, does anybody here know the name of that law? About
Emergency powers law?
who?
The emergency powers law?
No, not, anyway, it's about, it is emergency powers law, but it sets conditions for the president to initiate hostilities or to activate military in defense of an emergent situation. Now, we're in the middle of a squawk about that, but I don't know that many people are squawking. So this is something that you ought to think about. And by the way, the whole point of this is to remind us about these allocations of powers and the checks and balances. And if those checks and balances are not being activated, we're going to know it because I expect every person in this room to be very aware of what our elected officials are doing or not doing in order to assert and defend their own powers and the balance of powers between the branches, right? So be thinking about that. as you read the news tomorrow morning or tonight. By the way, the Congress is the one to raise and support military and establish rules and regulations governing military officials and military forces. There's a whole host of laws around that that's way too involved and complicated to try to do in 30 seconds. So I'm not even going to try. Sorry. We do, if you want, let the leadership know, and maybe we'll have to do part 2. And here's another provision that I thought I should mention. I didn't write down where it came from, but it's in Article 1, Section 8, I believe. And it says, no money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. And a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all money shall be published from time to time. So we'll get to the executive branch soon. But some of you have this exhibit on the table. And if you have more than 1 or 2 at your table, I would ask you to offer it to some people in the back of the room. So yeah, Bob, if you could help move some papers around, that would be great. So, apologies for the density of this graphic, but it's the best one I could find with the most information. We're not going to squint at every single thing, just a few. So you see this is a graphic from the government printing office, no less. They must have it right. About the branches of government. All right. So you'll see the legislative, what? You'll see the legislative in green at the top, right where it belongs, because it's the middle of everything. And you'll see the executive to the right on the bottom, no, to your left on the bottom in blue. And then the judiciary gets a nice red dot. That's my favorite color. Okay, so, and then you see where those circles overlap, it becomes white, right? In here, in between all these, the 3 branches, there's this white section. And crossing that section are some kind of balloons with arrows. So starting with the green balloon arrows on the right-hand side, okay, I'm going to turn this around so I can see it. You see three bubbles. One is that the Congress can impeach the president. That's one check that Congress can exercise against a president. The next one is that Congress has to approve treaties and appointments. So the president has the exclusive authority to negotiate treaties with foreign nations. But in order to be given effect, the Senate has to, wait a minute. The Congress has to approve. Actually, it's the Senate that approves appointments, advice and consent to approve appointments to the courts, to the federal courts, and appointments to the cabinet positions and other high-level positions. There's no definition in the Constitution of what an officer is that the president appoints and the Senate approves and consents and advises. So we're kind of winging it, but at a minimum, it involves people who exercise some degree of sovereign power. Maybe rulemaking, final approval on some major policies or whatever. So anyway, relatively minor point today. Oh, wait,
Just have a question.
real fast?
Real fast.
Okay.
At the risk of sounding stupid, because I don't care, when we say Congress, are we referring to the collective body of both the House of Representatives and the Senate?
I love that question. Who do we mean by Congress? Sometimes people refer to Congress as meaning just the House of Representatives. I am going to try to mind my mouth and make sure that I use Congress to refer to the whole thing, Senate and House. Okay? So, that's a cultural fluke.
I've got a question about the thing that you were saying, it didn't know really, about the departments of the president. It says down here at the bottom, in the white circle.
Yes.
In the blues, inside the blue, and on the right-hand side, 15 heads of the executive department.
Yes. So
Did
heads
limit
of,
it to 15?
well, no, the heads of the executive departments probably number more than 15, but
Yeah, I'm just
at the time this chart was made, there were 15 who had a seat on the, what do you call it?
The cabinet.
The
Cabinet.
cabinet.
Yeah.
There's more than that. EPA's not on cabinet,
Yeah.
but it's high official.
Okay, now, I want to keep moving. And can we do it fast?
I will.
It's
Okay,
If I understand correctly, the judiciary has no power of enforcement.
correct. There is no judicial army or police force to enforce its orders. It depends on what? Belief in the rule of law, commitment to the rule of law, commitment to the Constitution and the laws that are made pursuant to the Constitution. That's a very important point to keep in mind. If you were watching the news last night and overnight. All right, can you jot down your questions, please, everybody? So I can get through my part so you can do your part. Because when you do your part, you'll draw out more information, and I want you to have that chance. All right, now, so the legislative branch has two balloons pointing over to the judiciary, the judicial branch. And it says that Congress can overturn court decisions by amendments. All right. Amendments to what? Typically, it's an amendment to a law of Congress. If the court has interpreted a law of Congress in a way that Congress really didn't mean, but they didn't get it written very clearly, they'll go back and rewrite it. Or, if it's found to be unconstitutional, they might try to rescue the law through some amendment if there's room to do that. Otherwise, if it's unconstitutional, it's unenforceable. And then, of course, Congress can impeach judges. That's another balloon heading over to the Judicial Department.
Supreme Court justices?
They can impeach Supreme Court justices and other
Yep.
federal judges.
Yep.
Not state judges, they have no power over state judges. All right, now, let's mosey on over to the judicial branch, real quick. You see there are, in the judicial branch, you'll see there are 3 blue balls with gold circles around them. And they designate the tiers of courts, the tiers of courts in the federal system. So the district courts district courts is the name given to trial courts in the federal system. District courts, and they're spread all over the country. And when you're charged with the federal law in Tennessee, your trial happens in a federal courthouse in Tennessee. Greenville, yeah, for this part of the state. And then there are intermediate courts called appellate courts. And in the federal system, the appellate courts are generally called circuit courts. but there are some specialized courts, intermediate courts as well. And then, of course, there's the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is required. That's the only court that is required by the Constitution. And the Constitution doesn't say there shall be 9 justices. No, Congress actually gets to say how many justices there will be on the Supreme Court. The Constitution says that it doesn't say they serve for life. They serve as long as they're vertical and they want to be there.
Or somewhat vertical.
That might be a little snarky. I'm sorry, Sharon?
State Supreme Court.
No, that applies just to the federal Supreme Court. Okay, now, that down at the bottom of the courts is a balloon aiming at the executive. And this is one of many ways that the court can get in the way of the executive. And that is, Supreme Court can overturn executive orders. So there you have it. Now, let's look at oaths of office. Okay, the reason how do you make this go back here?
Yep.
All right. These are tremendous powers that the 3 branches have to exercise. They have tremendous impact on the people who get to know the federal government up close and personal. You don't want to do that if you can avoid it. Now, oh yeah, this. So the rest of the Constitution has, a whole article about relations among states and the federal government. There's an amendment process that's very complicated. It's really hard to use. There is an expression about ratification. I think I'll move on. So with all these tremendous powers in the federal government, we would want, and the framers wanted, people to take oaths before they enter into a public office that gives effect to all these powers. So, this is what the Constitution says about, this is what the Constitution says about oaths. It says, senators and representatives and members of several state legislatures, so this is a requirement that goes beyond federal, okay? And all executive and judicial officers, both of the U.S. and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support the Constitution. That type of oath has to be administered to every public official in our country. Who else has had to make that oath?
Military.
Military, but, anybody in this room?
When I was working the elections, then I was.
Elections,
Yep.
so is it elected
Poll
officials,
workers.
poll workers?
When you go to court, you swear to tell the truth.
That's a different oath.
Being naturalized, she said.
Hmm?
Being naturalized.
I'm a citizen.
Becoming a citizen, people becoming citizens.
This is a big.
Okay.
This is a big.
Okay. So anyway, our officials take this oath, but notice this doesn't have the text. So Congress came along and made an oath of office, prescribed one just for Congress, people entering Congress. And you can read that at another time. The President's oath of office, though, appears right in the Constitution, which means the Congress can't tinker with that one. This is what the President says forever, until this is amended. Executive powers. So, executive power is one of the president's powers, and that refers to something that's actually in Article 2, Section 3. It says, I'm going to amend it a little bit. She shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed and shall commission all the officers of the United States. The president is the commander-in-chief, does command the military, but the president cannot just raid the bank to finance it. He's got to get the money from Congress, and he's got to get the authorization from Congress. The president can veto legislation, and that's a pretty simple process. The president can grant reprieves and pardons, but just to people who've been convicted of a federal crime. President cannot relieve someone of the responsibility for violating a state law. So a reprieve is when the sentence is shortened, the punishment is relieved, or a pardon is when it's like, oh, never mind, you're off the hook. The president makes treaties, again, subject to advice and consent of the Senate. And that advice and consent has to be by a 2/3 vote for treaties. And the last, all right. The last three on this slide in red: executive agreements, executive orders, and signing statements. Those are things that presidents do that are implied, that they have the power to do. Not going, huh?
But it's lost.
Okay,
The whole thing.
Keep moving.
good.
Consider the power as well.
All right, we're almost done. Okay, executive agreements is when presidents make just administrative kinds of agreements with foreign nations, like what to and provide security for an ambassador, or to call a meeting, or whatever. So those are agreements with foreign nations. And then there are executive orders, which you've probably heard of lately. Those executive orders, though, are supposed to be only within the confines of the president's constitutional powers. The president cannot make a new law or conflict with the laws passed by Congress or with the Constitution by way of an executive order. So that's generating a whole lot of litigation right now, and I found a website that keeps monitoring and listing, and it's growing and growing, and the list is huge. Signing memos are when the president will tell Congress, when they sign a law, that this is how I plan to implement it. And it's a way of going on the record to, tell his administration, her administration, and her legislative branch what the president thinks is important to deal with that new law. Limits on executive powers are the laws of Congress. Obviously, the laws of Congress are superior. There's always been a pull and tug between the executive and the Congress about laws. And sometimes that pull and tug has to do with assertions that, oh, you're intruding on the powers of the president, and I don't have to obey that law, or things like that. And it happens between legislature and the courts too. Sometimes the legislature wants to get a leash on the courts and make them, cooperate a little bit better with the wishes of Congress. too bad. And the courts do not take that bait. The courts don't take that bait. Congress, you have to know this. I cannot go out in good conscience and not tell you. Congress has shared or delegated portions of its lawmaking authority with the administration, with places like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission, what are some agencies? At the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and HHS, right? CDC, all these alphabets. And it's by really necessity, because Congress doesn't have the expertise and the horsepower to really get to the heart of these laws. But the thing is, because lawmaking is a job of Congress, when Congress delegates some of that authority, it comes with a lot of strings meant to hold the administrative rulemaking to the confines of the Constitution and the laws that the Congress has made. So Congress has to provide a very clear statement of intent and purpose, and they have to have an intelligible principle to guide the discretion of administrators when they're making rules. Quick story. When I was practicing in Broward County government, HIPAA came out. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Huge transformation of medical operations. And I was the crazy one who raised her hand and said, "Oh, I'll do that." Well, some 6 months later, the table behind me had stacks like this of draft rules to comment on. I had to figure out which ones apply to which agencies in the government and so on. It was a lot. There's a lot of rules out there. But that was a complicated area to regulate, and there's no way that Congress could have done that. They have to have agencies to do rulemaking, to implement the laws. All right, appropriations. Appropriations are a real check on both the judiciary and the executive, okay? Because you can't have a new court, a new district court, for example, in Tennessee. If we wanted one, we'd have to get money for it and get legislation to make it happen, and that doesn't come easily. So the power of the purse belongs to the legislative, even as it relates to judicial operations, and certainly to executive operations. A quick note about impeachment, and then I think we'll just move on to discussion. Impeachment. Impeachment can be done by Congress if they can show that the official who's subject to impeachment has where did it go? Has committed a high crime or misdemeanor. So has the person committed a high crime or misdemeanor? They can be impeached by the House. Impeachment is simply the charging document. They do an investigation to see if there's probable cause to believe that this official has somehow violated one of these terms for impeachment. Who are the officers? It's not clear. It's not defined in the Constitution, but we've pretty much settled on it, meaning certainly the president, judges, and certain officials that have to go through the advice and consent approval by the Senate. So, in my lifetime, Clinton and Trump were impeached but acquitted. Nixon escaped impeachment by resigning. In the life of our country, one senator, Mr. William Blount from Tennessee, was impeached but expelled from the Senate before his trial. 15 judges have been impeached and 8 were convicted. 3 presidents impeached, Andrew Johnson, also Tennessee, but he was acquitted. And then Clinton was acquitted and Trump was acquitted twice. The Secretary of War, a Secretary of War, and I don't know where he's from, but he was impeached but acquitted. And then finally, Secretary of Homeland Security, most recently, Alejandro Mayorkas, faced charges for impeachment, but it was dismissed as unconstitutional. So that's the story on impeachment. I think we will call it time to wrap up our activity and address other questions. But I would remind you, please, that in our discussions, we respect the nonpartisan, nonprofit commitments of the League of Women Voters, so we're going to offer no names or parties. Okay? So, who wants to go back to this activity and have a little chat about factions? Candace?
So the one that as far as what's opposed to the environmental faction, people that care about clean land, water, air, and, you know, at this point, let's say, their political agenda is to make a healthy planet for all of us to have that, but I see a lot of stuff, especially something you mentioned earlier, you said Congress has delegated some of its lawmaking to these agencies. So what happens to environmental if EPA, does it go to the states or does it go back to Congress as far as that lawmaking around environmental if EPA is completely disassembled?
Okay, so the question is framed as that we acknowledge that there's a huge environmental protection faction in our country, composed of lots of different groups who overlap on this big issue, right? And what's going to happen if the EPA, at the direction of the president, guts the EPA or diminishes their staffing and gives them direction perhaps to not be so quick to enforce environmental laws, right? That's a problem. And who's gonna squawk though? Who's gonna squawk if, remember the two components of the other side that Madison recognized, let's see, where other citizens are threatened, because, you know, the administration's mission right now is to promote oil, right? At the expense of, to save money by slashing and burning different administrative agencies such as the EPA. And so, is that an adverse or permanent and aggregate? Is it adverse to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community? That's the question that Madison would pose.
I would say those of us who want clean air and water for our grandchildren, we're the group that's, you know, that,
Okay, so grandparents.
yeah.
That's a pretty big group, right?
Yeah.
But is it all grandparents? No. Environmentalist grandparents. So that shrunk. Are there any others in the grandparents group that might not jump on the bandwagon?
Big oil executives.
Oh, big oil.
And stockholders,
And land developers.
Oligarchs.
stockholders.
Okay. So,
But based on what you just told us about who gets to establish these agencies, the president doesn't have the authority to dismantle an agency because Congress established it, right?
Exactly. I'm so glad you were listening. Thank you. So what's the deal?
Congress needs to take control and not abdicate.
Linda? Oh, okay.
Can't hear back there.
You need to. Okay, so the question was, I'm just.
Yeah.
The question
We'll be able to hear.
was,
Yes,
well,
once you
wait a
hear.
minute, you told us that Congress is the one in charge of making agencies and appropriating money to have agencies actually go. So how does that work? Well, that's the problem. You have hit the problem nail on the head. So what do we do about that problem?
Tell Congress to abide by the
Call our
Constitution.
Congress people, right?
To abide by the Constitution.
Exactly. And what else do? We can do more than that.
I was gonna ask.
Okay. What else can we do besides call our congresspersons?
Demonstrate.
Demonstrate. What else can we do?
Vote them out of office.
Vote them out of office. Find
Run
a
for
candidate that is going to back you up.
Run for office.
Run for office.
Find an organization to sue them.
Get an organization. When it comes to environmentalists, believe me, there are lots of organizations prepared and doing just that. So, okay. There's something else I wanted to say to you folks before we finish some more questions, because I feel it's really, really, really important to me. I'm going to give you my closing remarks. So, and it's certainly relevant to what we just talked about. So, I feel that our American people have become spoiled and complacent. Our people have become complacent, and inattentive, and that's how we've gotten to this position. Now, you may not be the complacent and inattentive people, because you're here at least, but, we haven't had any trouble like this in eons. At least, I don't know, when was the last big trouble? Civil War, 60s. The 60s was another big era. Anyway, so, the 80s. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we're fighting fires on every front. But we need more fighters. And here's what I propose. To remind our American public, you folks, your grandkids, your kids, your neighbors, your friends, your social groups, you are all connected in so many ways to such a big part of our community. I bet you if we did a little mapping of how many bits of the community are touched just by the people in this room, it would be totally remarkable. So here's what we have to do. Invite everybody to pay attention and to respect and support our Constitution, to abide by the rule of law, to research, vote for, and monitor our elected officials. You've got to pay attention. Hold officials accountable with your voice and with your vote. Make those things work. Remember, the power is with the people, so use your voice. And on a personal level, I would ask that as human beings, we recognize the great diversity and great disadvantages among our population's life experiences in this country. So across all of our differences and difficulties, I hope that we can all treat each other with respect and compassion, and to demand that our government leaders do the same. We need to encourage respect and compassion.
Hear, hear.
So,
Sure.
Christina, thank you.
Easy one. Is violating the Constitution a high crime and misdemeanor?
That's a good question.
Please repeat it.
And the question that Christina raises is violation by an official who's taken an oath to abide by the Constitution, support, defend, etc. Is that a high crime or misdemeanor?
Answer my vote.
It should be, right? And maybe it's, I don't know the answer. Nobody's been challenged with an impeachment threat because of that. But maybe it's time to make our voice heard to Congress, to raise the oath up to legal status with consequences. Wouldn't that would be a blast. Anyway, did you?
Somebody who hasn't been elected to do,
Yeah,
to tear the government apart.
yes. So Edie's asking, well, what about the person who's been appointed to take a wrecking ball to various administrative agencies, slashing jobs and operations, and can that person be subject to impeachment? Well, I don't think that person's even been subject to appointment, consent, and approval of the Senate. So,
Credit check.
yes. Betty?
On Inauguration Day, the Constitution has disappeared from the White House website. And they said it was
Okay,
a glitch.
wait a minute, hold on.
But it's still not there. Yeah, give her the microphone. I'm sorry, on Inauguration Day, the Constitution has been removed from the White House website. And they said it was a little glitch, along with bios of Abraham Lincoln and Obama, et cetera. It's still not that, it's not a glitch. If they can dismantle our and hack the federal government, they can fix the website.
That's a concern. That's a concern. Anybody else?
Where's that?
I'll get to you.
One
Tom?
of the things that we talk about, that you've talked about is these, one of the things you've talked about is the structure where the Congress sets up organizations like the EPA, whose job is to protect the environment and to protect us who live in the environment. So when the EPA does not follow its assignment and says, yeah, let's have a little more mercury in the water to make it sparkle, perhaps the Congress should then have obligations to reorganize the EPA.
You would think. Congress may be paying attention, but they're not apparently too concerned right now, at least not a majority.
I think that this president understands going in with all of his cronies that they can't destroy the agency. What he can do is gut it, right? Gut it so fast that it's hard for Congress to respond, hard for news people to cover it, understand it. That is the problem. They're gutting it and leaving them all just house of cards.
You expect that, right?
Thank you, Mary.
I'm just curious, as with all the executive orders and all the lawsuits that are going on, I'm just assuming that all of us here are paying for all that litigation on the opposite side.
Yep.
Whereas people like myself are contributing to organizations who are fighting all that. So we're
You're paying
just sort of
twice.
getting a double dose of getting screwed on our expenses.
I'd say it's a triple dose with the effects of the no trade tariffs.
Yes, if the executive branch does not have the authority to disassemble an agency, do they have the authority to create a new agency?
No, they don't.
Because it has to be funded.
Agencies are created by Congress.
Has to be funded.
Yeah, So that's yet a part of the discussion around Doge.
They said they were going to start soon.
Right.
They said.
Just a minute, there's another one over here.
You made a comment about we gotta take action. The challenge is we have to sacrifice time, money, and lost friends, rather than just be at home and take care of ourselves. And until we do that, nothing's gonna happen.
Here, here.
I'm with you. Okay, so I'm not advocating a religion, but the Center for Action and Contemplation has programs that teach you about finding that spiritual energy and guiding that spiritual energy in this direction that we're talking about in terms of advocacy for ourselves and our people.
This may be the basis for another session like this, but does Tennessee's constitution mimic with the same division of powers between, the
Great
governor?
question.
Does it mimic the US Constitution?
The Tennessee Constitution does recognize 3 branches of government in terms of the interrelationships. I have not looked at it that closely to opine. Another session.
Whole session to itself.
More questions back here. Hold on.
The legislature's
Then I'll go up front and we'll wrap this up.
Is there an executive check on congressional appropriations other than the veto? If there's money already appropriated, it can be withheld, it can be not spent.
Good question, and I don't have a complete handle on how much room the president has to act. But one big source of power and action is his political attachments to people in Congress. And we know right now that there's a bit of a majority there. But it would be hard to get Congress to do something unless members of Congress wanted to. Exactly. Yes, sir.
I don't want to take up for the lawyers for a minute. I realize that nobody likes legal fees, but I would like to suggest to this crowd, that the lawyers and the judicial branch of government are our last best hope at the moment. That's who's on the front line. And so I would like to, I'm pleased to see the overflowing crowd of this group. I think it is reflective of the concern of grassroots activism. Number 2, I want to tell you what I've seen in the judicial branch under the first Trump administration. He turned over the appointment of judges, federal judges, and especially the circuit court judges, that's the appellate court, and to the Supreme Court, to a group that has a lot of power in this country called the Federalist Society.
Yep.
You need to keep your ear out for the Federalist Society. I can't tell you I know a lot about them, but a very sophisticated group, mostly lawyers and judges. That is who Trump is turning to for the appointment within the judiciary. And perhaps the Supreme Court appointments are reflective of that.
Thank you, Eric, for that boost.
True.
Eric Herron has been, attorney for?
I have had a career that I have had a career that I'm pleased to have participated in, which is civil rights defense. That's a lot of constitutional law. I'm now trying to move into what's known as the recovering lawyer program. And I have started a 12-step program. I'm on step 1. But anyway, I keep trying to retire.
Oh, you did? High school.
Thank you very much. Yes. You know, the lawyers get a big dose of constitutional law and
Wait.
procedure
Elementary school, high
and
school.
are, great resources out there if you find the right ones, right? So, thank you. And what about the Heritage, whatever?
Heritage Foundation.
The Heritage Foundation.
What about it?
There's another one big time behind a lot of this. So for Federalist Society and Heritage Foundation, keep an eye on them. Yes.
I'm sorry to double step, but, if anybody has seen, I just Googled what's the connection between the Constitution and democracy, and they are intertwined. Has anybody seen the recent Republican CPAC where they stand on the stadium and say, we almost destroyed democracy on January 6th, and we didn't quite get it done, but we will get it done this time.
Fair warning, folks, fair warning. I think it's out there, and we need to be paying attention. Tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell your kids, tell your grandkids. Be attentive and involved. Any others? All right, I brought, who else has a pocket constitution? Raise your hand if you have one.
Oh, we have one.
And if you have it with you, okay, anyway, come and get another one, or get your first one, keep it in your purse, keep it in your wallet, keep it in your pocket,
Give it to your congresswoman.
give it to your congressman.
So, you want to give Becky a thank you? We're going to roll over the lot. Reminder, next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday is our lunch with the league at the Black Olive. Our next big meeting is April the 27th, Sunday, 2 o'clock here. Public participation in decision making. So that's when we're talking about taking action. We're going to be talking about how to do that. I also was told someone left their keys on the sign-in table. So before you get down to the parking lot, you might want to check your keys.
We'll auction it off. We'll auction off the car.
And we're going to... Oh, so we won't auction the car off. And we will have links to all
Thanks
the
for joining us
handouts,
today.
the slides, and the YouTube in the next newsletter, which will be in about a week or so.